Blackwood Forest is one of those places that seems alive in a way that defies explanation. The towering pines stretch so high they blot out the sun, and the air is heavy with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. I've worked as a ranger here for over a decade, and though I've heard every tall tale, imaginable ghosts, curses, and shadow beasts stalking the woods, I've always chalked them up to local superstition. The forest is vast and remote, with sections that remain unexplored, and its isolation can play tricks on even the most experienced mind. I'd always told myself that there was a rational explanation for every whisper and shadow. That was before I got the call about Jake Tanner. Jake was a young man in his early 20s, an experienced hiker who had registered to camp near Howells Ridge, one of the more treacherous areas of Blackwood. The name wasn't a coincidence. Locals often talked about hearing howls there late at night, sounds too deep and guttural to belong to any wolf or coyote. Jake hadn't checked in after his 3-day permit expired, and his family reported him missing when he didn't return. Dispatch passed the case to me, and while I prepared my gear, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease creeping into my chest. Howells Ridge was notorious for a reason, and even seasoned hikers avoided it. The drive to the trailhead was uneventful, the winding dirt roads cutting through miles of dense forest. The deeper I went, the quieter it became. By the time I parked and set out on foot, the usual sounds of birds and rustling leaves had vanished, leaving only an oppressive silence that seemed to amplify the crunch of my boots on the dirt path. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows that danced with every step I took. I told myself Jake had probably just lost track of time or gotten turned around. Hikers made that mistake all the time. But as I approached the ridge, the stillness of the forest began to feel unnatural, as though it were holding its breath. The first sign that something was wrong came about an hour into my search. I found Jake's backpack near a clearing, its straps torn and the contents scattered. At first I thought it might have been an animal, a bear, maybe, but the tears in the fabric were clean, too precise to be the result of teeth or claws. Nearby, I found massive paw prints pressed into the soft earth. They were unlike anything I'd ever seen, far too large to belong to a wolf, and with an odd, elongated shape that sent a shiver down my spine. I radioed back to the station to report my findings, though I left out the part about the prints. I didn't want to sound ridiculous, not yet. As the day wore on, the forest began to change in ways I couldn't ignore. The trail grew narrower, the trees pressing in on either side as though they were trying to swallow the path. The light filtering through the canopy grew dimmer, casting everything in a hazy twilight, even though it was only mid-afternoon. The air felt heavier, almost suffocating, and every breath tasted faintly metallic. I followed the trail deeper into the woods, my flashlight now in hand as the shadows grew longer. The paw prints continued, leading me off the marked path and into uncharted territory. The deeper I went, the stranger the terrain became. Rocks jutted out of the ground at odd angles, their surfaces covered in thick moss that seemed to glisten even in the dim light. Trees were marked with deep gouges, claw marks that ran in parallel lines as though something massive had raked its talons across the bark. Then came the sounds. At first it was faint branches snapping in the distance, the occasional rustle of leaves. But as I pressed on, the noises grew louder and more deliberate, as though something was following me. I stopped to listen, my pulse hammering in my ears, but the forest fell silent again. It was the kind of silence that makes your skin crawl, the kind that tells you you're not alone. The first howl came just as the sun dipped below the horizon. It was deep and guttural, a sound that vibrated through the trees and settled in my bones. It didn't sound like a wolf or a coyote. It was something else, something larger. My hand went instinctively to the bear spray on my belt, though I doubted it would do much good against whatever had made that noise. I decided to set up camp for the night. It wasn't ideal, but I knew better than to keep moving in the dark. As I built a small fire, the howls continued, echoing through the forest in a way that made it impossible to tell where they were coming from. My flashlight's beam barely penetrated the darkness beyond the trees, and every flicker of movement sent my heart racing. I sat with my back to the fire, scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. But nothing came, not yet. The attack happened just before dawn. I'd been dozing by the fire, my exhaustion finally winning out over my fear. The low growl woke me first, a deep, rumbling sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once. I shot up, my flashlight in hand, the beam cutting through the fog that had settled over the forest. At first I saw nothing. The fire had burned low, its embers casting a faint orange glow across the clearing. Then, just beyond the edge of the light, I saw it. A pair of glowing yellow eyes staring at me from the shadows. They were too high off the ground to belong to any animal I knew, and the way they moved slowly, deliberately sent a wave of cold terror through me. The creature stepped into the light, and I felt my breath catch in my throat. It was massive, easily over 7 feet tall, with a body that was both animal and human. Its limbs were long and muscular, covered in matted fur that gleamed in the firelight. Its claws were like daggers, each one glinting as it flexed its hands. But it was the face that haunted me, a wolfish snout, sharp teeth bared in a snarl, and those eyes glowing with an intelligence that was far too human. I grabbed the flare gun from my pack and fired without thinking. The flare shot past the creature, exploding in a burst of red light that lit up the clearing. The beast let out a furious roar, rearing back on its hind legs as the light burned into its eyes. I didn't wait to see what it would do next. I grabbed my gear and ran, the sounds of its growls and crashing footsteps following me into the trees. I ran blindly through the forest, the darkness swallowing me as I stumbled over roots and crashed through underbrush. The creature's roar still echoed in my ears, and its heavy footsteps weren't far behind. My flashlight bobbed wildly in my hand, its beam barely illuminating the gnarled trees that seemed to lean closer with every step. My lungs burned, and my legs felt like lead, but fear propelled me forward. The thought of what the creature could do if it caught me was more than enough motivation. The forest seemed endless, each step dragging me deeper into its labyrinthine depths. The growls and crashing sounds behind me grew louder, more frantic, as if the beast was toying with me. My instincts screamed to hide, but every shadow felt like it belonged to the creature, every tree a potential trap. Then, through the chaos, I spotted something, a jagged rock formation jutting out of the earth like a natural fortress. Without thinking, I veered toward it, my boots skidding on loose dirt as I scrambled up the rocks. The climb was brutal, my hands slipping on moss-covered stone, but I forced myself upward. When I finally reached the top, I collapsed behind a large boulder, gasping for breath. I killed my flashlight, plunging myself into total darkness. The growls stopped, replaced by an eerie silence that was almost worse. I pressed myself against the rock, trying to steady my breathing, and strained to listen. A faint rustling broke the stillness, followed by the sound of claws scraping against stone. My heart raced as the noise grew louder, closer, until I could feel the vibration through the ground. The creature was below me, circling the rock formation, its low growls rumbling like distant thunder. It knew I was here. I gripped the flare gun tightly, my only defense against the thing stalking me. My mind raced, cycling through every scrap of knowledge I had about predators and survival. But this wasn't a bear or a mountain lion. This was something else, something that didn't belong in the natural world. The thought sent a shiver down my spine, and I tightened my grip on the flare gun, ready for the creature to strike. The silence stretched on, broken only by the occasional snap of a branch or the crunch of leaves underfoot. I began to think the creature had given up, that maybe I'd finally outrun it. But then I saw them, those glowing yellow eyes, peering at me from just below the edge of the rock. My stomach dropped as the creature pulled itself up, its claws digging into the stone with ease. I fired the flare without hesitation, the red light exploding in the creature's face. It howled in fury, its massive body recoiling as it shielded its eyes. Taking advantage of its distraction, I scrambled down the opposite side of the rocks, my boots slipping and sliding on the loose dirt. I hit the ground hard, but forced myself to my feet, adrenaline masking the pain. The beast's roar echoed behind me, and I knew it wouldn't stay disoriented for long. I ran until my legs gave out, collapsing onto a patch of damp earth. The forest had changed again, the trees growing impossibly dense, their branches intertwining overhead to block out the faint light of the moon. The air was colder here, heavy with the metallic tang of blood. My breath came in ragged gasps, each inhale filling my lungs with the stench of decay. The sounds of pursuit had faded, but I knew better than to think I was safe. The creature was still out there, somewhere in the darkness, waiting for the right moment to strike. I tried to gather my thoughts, to come up with a plan, but my mind was a whirlwind of fear and exhaustion. The flare gun was empty now, its single shot spent, leaving me with no real means of defense. As I sat there, trying to steady my breathing, I noticed something strange. The ground beneath me wasn't dirt, it was stone, smooth and cold to the touch. I shone my flashlight around and realized I was sitting in the center of a large, circular clearing. The trees formed a perfect ring around the space, their trunks etched with deep claw marks that glistened in the light. At the center of the clearing stood a large, weathered stone, its surface covered in strange symbols I didn't recognize. The symbols were carved deep into the rock, their edges sharp and precise, as though they had been made with tools rather than claws. They formed spirals and jagged lines that seemed to shift when I looked at them too long, making my head spin. A low hum filled the air, barely audible but impossible to ignore, and I felt an overwhelming sense of wrongness, as though I'd stumbled into a place I wasn't meant to see. Then the whispers began. At first they were faint, like distant voices carried on the wind, but as I stood there, frozen in place, they grew louder, forming words that sent chills down my spine. "Leave. You don't belong. It's watching." I turned in a slow circle, my flashlight sweeping over the trees, but I saw nothing. The forest was empty, yet the whispers continued, their tone urgent and filled with malice. A sudden growl shattered the stillness, and I spun around just in time to see the creature step into the clearing. It was larger than I remembered, its fur matted with blood and its yellow eyes blazing with rage. It moved with a predator's grace, its massive claws flexing as it circled the stone. My flashlight flickered, the beam sputtering as the creature's growls grew louder, reverberating through the clearing like a drumbeat. I backed away slowly, my heart pounding as I tried to think of a way out. But the trees were too dense to run through, and the creature blocked the only clear path. I was trapped. The creature moved closer, its massive frame illuminated by the weak beam of my flashlight. Every muscle in its body seemed coiled, ready to strike. Its breath came in short, ragged bursts, visible in the cold air as wisps of mist. The low growl that rumbled from its chest was almost hypnotic, vibrating through the clearing and rattling my nerves. I couldn't move, couldn't think, as its glowing eyes locked onto mine. The whispers in the air grew louder, overlapping in a chaotic cacophony of incomprehensible words, all urging me to run, to fight, to surrender. The beast lunged before I could react, its claws slicing through the air where I'd been standing a second earlier. I stumbled backward, tripping over a root and falling hard onto the ground. My flashlight flew from my hand, spinning away into the darkness and leaving me in near-total blackness. The only light now came from the faint glow of the symbols on the stone, their strange patterns casting eerie shadows across the clearing. Desperation took over as I scrambled to my feet, my hands fumbling for anything I could use as a weapon. My fingers closed around a jagged rock, its surface slick with moss. I hurled it at the creature with all my strength, but it barely flinched as the stone glanced off its shoulder. The beast let out an enraged snarl, its massive jaws snapping inches from my face as it closed the distance between us. I ran for the stone in the center of the clearing, its presence drawing me like a magnet. The whispers seemed to emanate from it now, clearer and more urgent. "Use it. The stone. Stop it." I didn't know what it meant, but I didn't have time to question it. The beast was right behind me, its claws raking the air as I threw myself against the stone. The moment my hands touched its surface, a jolt of energy shot through me, like a current of electricity coursing through my veins. The symbols on the stone flared brightly, illuminating the entire clearing in a harsh white light. The creature let out a pained howl, its movements growing sluggish as the light seemed to sap its strength. It staggered back, shielding its eyes with one massive arm, and for the first time, I saw something like fear in its expression. The whispers reached a crescendo, their voices blending into a single, commanding tone. "Finish it. End the curse." My hands moved on their own, tracing the glowing symbols on the stone as though guided by an unseen force. The light grew brighter, pulsing in time with the frantic beating of my heart. The creature roared, its voice filled with pain and fury as the ground beneath us began to shake. The stone pulsed with an unnatural energy, each flash of light sending waves of heat through the clearing. The whispers became deafening, their words now fully clear. "Release us. Banish the beast." The creature writhed in agony, its massive claws raking at the ground as it tried to fight against the force emanating from the stone. Its movements grew frantic, desperate, as though it knew its time was running out. I pressed my hands harder against the stone, the heat searing my palms but filling me with a strange sense of purpose. The symbols glowed brighter with each passing second, their intricate patterns shifting and rearranging as though alive. I didn't understand what was happening, but I could feel the power coursing through me, connecting me to the stone and the forest itself. The creature let out a final deafening roar, its body convulsing as the light from the stone consumed it. Its form began to dissolve, its edges blurring and fading like smoke caught in the wind. The yellow glow of its eyes dimmed, replaced by a hollow emptiness that sent a chill down my spine. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the beast was gone. The clearing fell silent, the whispers fading into nothingness as the light from the stone dimmed. I collapsed to the ground, my body trembling with exhaustion and pain. The air felt lighter now, as though a great weight had been lifted, and for the first time in hours I could hear the distant chirping of birds. The forest was alive again, its oppressive silence replaced by the familiar sounds of nature. I stayed there for what felt like hours, staring at the now dull stone and trying to process what had happened. The symbols were still etched into its surface, but they no longer glowed, their power seemingly spent. Whatever force had driven the beast, whatever curse had bound it to this place, was gone. The journey back to the station was a blur. My legs felt like lead, every step a battle against exhaustion and the lingering pain in my body. The forest seemed different now, its once foreboding presence replaced by a strange calm. The trees no longer loomed as menacingly, and the air was free of the metallic tang that had clung to it before. When I finally reached the trailhead, the first rays of sunlight were breaking over the horizon, casting the forest in a soft golden glow. It felt surreal, almost as though the events of the night had been a nightmare. But the claw marks on my arms and the shredded remains of my gear were proof enough that it had been real. Back at the station, I filed a report about Jake Tanner, though I left out the supernatural elements. I claimed that his death had been the result of a bear attack, knowing that no one would believe the truth. The official explanation would satisfy the authorities, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd only scratched the surface of what truly lay within Blackwood Forest. Weeks passed, but the memories of that night refused to fade. I saw the beast's eyes every time I closed my own, and the whispers still echoed in my mind, faint but persistent. I resigned from my post soon after, unable to face the forest again. But even away from Blackwood, I couldn't escape its grip. At night, I would wake to the sound of howls in the distance, far too close for comfort. Shadows moved in the corners of my vision, and my dreams were filled with the glowing symbols of the stone. The scars on my arms itched constantly, a reminder of the creature's claws and the power of the curse I had broken. I don't know what I released that night or if I truly ended the beast's reign. All I know is that Blackwood Forest is a place that doesn't forgive trespassers. It doesn't forget.